You wrote about this white kid named Jeremy, teenager, 16, that was murdered in a community in 1986. How'd you learn about that, and what role, if any, do you think that played in the injunction that came the year later?
I learned about it in here. Some white teenager who was buying drugs on the corner of Cadillac and Corning, and due to some miscommunication between the dealers, was basically shot. He was shot and killed, like on the corner of Cadillac and Guthrie. The geography of Cadillac-Corning is important because you have there Beverly Hills just to the north, Pico-Robertson to the northwest, and Beverlywood. You had these like rich areas right adjacent to it. It's not like, Watts, which is surrounded by other low-income minority neighborhoods. It's like this was a low-income minority neighborhood surrounded by wealthier areas. So even though it wasn't like the top crime area of LA, it got the most attention and became the site of this policing experiment because it was like, well, we have to do something to like clean up this, this dirty area, which is surrounded by clean areas. And if we can clean this area up, then we kind of have a continuous, safe white area.
I found it really interesting that if the injunction is about crime and violence, why aren't we injuncting the highest crime and violence areas for gangs? But as you know, the first one is the Playboy Gangster Crips, an area that had its fair share of crime, but wasn't the highest crime area in LA.
It wasn't like even in the top 10. But of course, now you get injunctions everywhere. I mean, we did end up getting them in the high crime areas too. Not just in LA, but all over California. That's how we have these enormous gang databases now. People don't even know they're on the gang databases. Like, don't even know how to get off them. And then suddenly they get pulled in for one thing or another, and there's a gang enhancement. Then all of a sudden their 3-year minimum becomes like a 5-year minimum or a 10-year minimum. And it's just like it's a way to basically like pre-convict someone for a crime that they never did. Like being in a gang is like being in a fraternity or being in any social group. It's just a social group. Like being in a gang is not a crime. Being a Playboy gangster there's literally nothing illegal about it. And yet, if you're identified as being one on an injunction, suddenly there's all these things you can't do. You can't ride a bike. You can't have a pager. There were all these things that they worked into the 1987 injunction, which were, devised. They were tailor-made specifically for Cadillac-Corning. So they looked at how the drug trade worked in Cadillac-Corning. They had people, standing on rooftops as lookouts. So they said, no standing on rooftops if you're on this list. They had lookouts on bikes, so you weren't allowed to be on a bike. They had people jumping over fences, standing on, by hopping on crates, so you weren't allowed to hold crates. And you eventually, Professor Muniz's work, like she talks about, you can now see those details of the gang injunctions on injunctions that are placed on Houston or on Atlanta. Like you can see the details that were tailor-made for this 18-block neighborhood being applied to 16 square mile areas. So the whole thing, whether or not it worked initially, it was intended for a very small space, but it was never intended, one thing I wrote in the article, was never intended to be used for such a large space. And it was kind of a Sorcerer's Apprentice type horror story where the city attorney, the assistant city attorney, this guy Bob Ferber, who kind of devised the idea of placing an abatement on the gang, saw it being applied everywhere, at the drop of a hat with no community involvement, and just saying, oh, this is just kind of a tool that is a rubber stamp. We can put this anywhere and watch the magic happen. And it's going to take decades, generations to undo.
Although he was pro-gang injunction, he realized that over time it didn't really, I guess, achieve the goals that they were designed to achieve, and that maybe there were some abuses along the way that came with the gang injunction. He seemed to admit that.
He admitted that there were abuses, for sure, but he didn't regret creating it.
Thanks for watching StreetTV.net. If you're not subscribed, please hit that button below and click the bell to receive alerts and notifications. Feel free to comment below so you can give us your feedback, and be sure to watch the 2 related episodes to the right. If you want to support this platform or follow us on social media, visit the links in the description, and thanks for watching StreetTV.net.